Have you ever looked at someone and thought you knew their whole story? The waitress with the tired eyes, the janitor pushing a broom down a silent hallway, the cashier who scans your groceries with a vacant expression. We see the uniform, the name tag, the role they play for us, and we write a narrative in our minds. A simple, two-dimensional story. But what if we're wrong? What if behind that tired smile lies a scholar, behind that quiet demeanor, a hero? What if the person we dismiss as invisible holds a power we could never comprehend? This is a story about what happens when one of those hidden worlds is forced into the light. It begins in a place designed to celebrate the visible, the loud, the wealthy. A place called the Gilded Spoon. The name itself was a promise of opulence, a haven for those whose lives were cushioned by wealth. Crystal glasses chimed like tiny bells, reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers. The air hummed with the low murmur of expensive conversations, punctuated by the polite clinking of silver on porcelain. Through this gilded maze moved Layla. To the patrons, she was a blur of motion in a crisp black apron, a silent functionary in their grand evening. They saw her hands refilling their water, her arm placing a plate of seared scallops before them, but they never truly saw her. They didn't see the faint lines of exhaustion etched around her gentle eyes, a map of sleepless nights and quiet worries. They didn't notice that her black, sensible shoes were worn down at the heels, a testament to the miles she walked each night on this plush carpet. Layla carried her trays with a practiced, steady grace, but the real weight she carried was invisible, a burden of memory and loss tucked deep within her heart. She was a ghost in this feast, her presence acknowledged only by its absence, a glass that needed filling, a plate that needed clearing. The owner of this gilded world, Mr. Arthur Thompson, stood near the bustling kitchen entrance, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of a tablet. He scrolled through spreadsheets, his brow furrowed. To him, the Gilded Spoon was a complex equation of profit margins, supply costs, and customer turnover. The staff, Layla included, were variables in that equation, numbers that needed to perform. He saw her pass by, a fleeting shadow on the periphery of his vision, and his mind registered only staff, position filled, functioning. He didn't see the woman who had once commanded a lecture hall, whose voice had once woven intricate tapestries from ancient poetry. He saw a cog in his machine, and as long as the machine ran smoothly, he had no reason to look any closer. But tonight, a wrench was about to be thrown into his perfectly calibrated machine, an unexpected force that would shatter the gilded illusion and force everyone to see the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. A ripple of tension spread through the restaurant, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that preceded the arrival of a storm. The maitre d', a man usually defined by his unflappable calm, suddenly looked flustered, his hand nervously straightening his tie. The source of the disruption was Mr. Khalid Al-Jamil, a billionaire whose name was whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of fear and reverence. He didn't walk into a room, he conquered it. He moved with an aura of absolute authority, his entourage trailing behind him like pilot fish on a great shark. His suit was a masterpiece of tailoring, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was sharp, angular, and his eyes held a cold, dismissive glint that scanned the opulent room not with appreciation, but with assessment, as if he were calculating its value and finding it wanting. He didn't speak to the staff, he issued decrees. "The best table," he said to the maitre d', not as a request, but as a statement of fact. He waved a dismissive hand at the wine list, naming a vintage so rare and expensive it made the sommelier blink. He treated the fawning staff like pieces of furniture, obstacles to be navigated on his way to his throne. The floor manager, a nervous man named Carl, decided Layla, with her quiet efficiency and unobtrusive nature, would be the least likely to cause a disturbance at such a high-stakes table. It was a fateful, unintentional irony. He assigned her to the billionaire. Layla felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach as she approached the table, her small notepad clutched in her hand. She smoothed her apron, took a deep, steadying breath, and composed her features into a mask of polite neutrality. This was the job, to be pleasant, to be efficient, and above all, to be invisible. Mr. Al-Jamil didn't even grant her a glance. As she stood waiting to take his order, he turned to one of his associates and began speaking in rapid, guttural Arabic. It was a language Layla knew better than the air she breathed, the language of her childhood, of her education, of her lost home. He spoke with a casual cruelty, confident in the privacy his mother tongue afforded him. "Make it quick," he said to his associate. "I have no desire to spend my evening being served by peasants." Layla's posture remained unchanged. Her face, a placid lake. But beneath the surface, a single, sharp stone had been dropped. A flicker of profound pain, a shadow of an old life, passed through her eyes, so quickly that no one could have possibly seen it. She simply uncapped her pen and waited, the insult echoing in the silent chambers of her heart, a language she was never meant to understand. The meal progressed like a slow-motion battle. Mr. Al-Jamil was a fortress of dissatisfaction. The soup was a degree too cool. The steak, he claimed, was cooked medium rare, not the perfect Pittsburgh rare, charred but blue inside, he had demanded. Each complaint was delivered with a sigh of profound weariness, as if the world's incompetence was a personal burden he was forced to bear. Layla met each complaint with quiet patience, her voice a low, steady murmur of, "Right away, sir," and, "I will see to it, sir." She moved with an economy of motion, her presence at the table a study in professional deference. All the while, the conversation in Arabic continued, a river of arrogant commentary flowing around her. Mr. Al-Jamil felt utterly secure, wrapped in the linguistic cloak of his heritage. He critiqued the other patrons, mocked the restaurant's decor, and boasted of a recent corporate takeover, all in the rich, expressive dialect of his homeland. Layla continued her duties, a silent keeper of his unguarded thoughts. Then it happened. In a gesture of expansive self-importance, Mr. Al-Jamil knocked his wine glass. A single, perfect drop of crimson splashed onto the pristine white cuff of his shirt. A dark flower bloomed on the expensive fabric. His face contorted in a mask of theatrical fury, all out of proportion to the minor incident. He glared at Layla as if she had personally assaulted him. He turned to his associate, his voice no longer a murmur but a harsh, grating rasp. In Arabic he spat the words, laced with a venom that was shocking in its intensity. "This clumsy girl," he seethed, loud enough for the entire table to hear clearly. "She probably lives in a dirt-floored hovel. Look at her. Utterly worthless. She is less than the dirt on my shoes." His associates, eager to please, offered sycophantic chuckles. The sound was obscene in the elegant dining room. For a single, stretched-out moment, Layla did not move. The entire world seemed to fall away, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversation, all of it silenced by the ringing in her ears. Then, with a calm that was more chilling than any shout, she lifted her head and looked directly into Mr. Al-Jamil's eyes. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it possessed a stunning, diamond-hard clarity that cut through the air. She spoke in flawless, classical Arabic, the formal, poetic tongue of scholars and intellectuals, an accent so pure it made his own dialect sound coarse and common. "Sir," she said, her pronunciation perfect, "the dirt on your shoes can be washed away." She paused, letting the words hang in the stunned silence. "But the filth in a man's heart stains his soul forever." The billionaire froze. His fork, halfway to his mouth, clattered onto his plate, the sound unnaturally loud. His jaw went slack, his lips parted in a silent gasp of disbelief. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid mask of shock and utter humiliation. His associates stared, their sycophantic smiles instantly vanishing, replaced by wide-eyed horror. The air at the table grew thick, heavy, and suffocating. The predator had become the prey, cornered not by a threat, but by a truth he never imagined could be spoken. Layla's gaze did not waver. She held his shocked stare, her own eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound and sorrowful dignity. Still speaking in the beautiful, classical Arabic that had so thoroughly dismantled him, she continued. Her voice was the steady, measured tone of a lecturer addressing a particularly slow student. "My home may be humble. she stated. But it is filled with an honor that your palaces seem to lack. And my hands, which you find so clumsy, have worked honestly every day of my life to harm no one. Can you say the same of yours? She placed the leather-bound bill folder gently on the table, the gesture as deliberate and final as a judge's gavel. Your meal is complete. Mr. Al-Jamil was a statue of shame. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged, only a choked stammer. The intricate architecture of his power, built on wealth and intimidation, had crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. He had been stripped bare, his arrogance exposed as vulgar ignorance by the very person he had deemed worthless. The commotion, a vortex of silence in the otherwise bustling room, had not gone unnoticed. Mr. Thompson, seeing the billionaire's table in disarray from across the room, began to stride over, his face a mask of concern. He saw a problem, a threat to his restaurant's carefully managed ecosystem. Just as he arrived, the floor manager, Carl, scurried to the table, his face slick with panic. Carl saw only a furious billionaire, a potential bad review, a catastrophic loss of revenue. Mr. Al-Jamil! I am so sorry, sir! He gushed, turning a venomous glare on Layla. This is unacceptable. This waitress, she will be terminated immediately. At once. He reached out to grab Layla's arm, to physically remove her from the scene, to erase the problem. It was the final miscalculation in an evening full of them. Layla pulled her arm back, not with aggression, but with a firm, undeniable finality. She turned her back on the humiliated billionaire and faced the frantic manager, her spine straight as a steel rod. Switching back to a calm, clear English, her voice carried a weight that made both Carl and the approaching Mr. Thompson stop short. That won't be necessary, she said. I quit. Her gaze shifted from Carl's sputtering face to Mr. Thompson, who had now reached the table. For the first time, she looked at her employer not as a subordinate, but as an equal. I will not work in a place where human beings are treated as disposable objects for the amusement of the wealthy. Mr. Thompson was utterly bewildered. He looked at the stammering, ashen-faced billionaire, a man known for his iron will, now looking like a chastised schoolboy. He looked at Layla, who stood with an almost regal composure, radiating a strength he had never noticed. He looked at Carl, who was wringing his hands in distress. The numbers on his spreadsheet suddenly seemed meaningless. This was human drama, raw and potent. Wait, he said, his voice cutting through Carl's panicked apologies. Don't go. Someone please tell me what just happened here. Mr. Al-Jamil, desperate to escape the spotlight of his own disgrace, fumbled in his jacket, threw a thick wad of cash onto the table, and practically fled the restaurant, his entourage scrambling in his wake. He didn't look back. Facing Mr. Thompson, Layla's composure remained intact. He insulted my dignity, my family, and my home, she explained, her voice even. He did so in my native language, assuming I was an uneducated servant who wouldn't understand his cruelty. He was wrong. The way she said, my native language, was imbued with a deep, resonant history. It wasn't just a collection of words, it was a world, a life, a past he couldn't possibly imagine. In that moment, Mr. Thompson understood that the woman standing before him was not just a waitress. She was an enigma, and he was suddenly, desperately compelled to understand her. He saw her then, truly saw her for the first time. The tired eyes weren't just from long shifts. They were windows to a past filled with hardship he couldn't fathom. The quiet efficiency wasn't just good training. It was the ingrained discipline of a person who had lost everything and had to rebuild a life from scratch, one meticulously placed footstep at a time. A profound and unsettling realization washed over Mr. Thompson. He looked around his own restaurant, this temple of gastronomy he had built, and saw it with new eyes. The golden light from the chandeliers suddenly seemed garish and hollow. The polite laughter of the patrons sounded brittle. He had been so obsessed with polishing the gilded surface that he had completely ignored the foundation. He had created a culture, not of hospitality, but of servitude, where the whims of the wealthy were paramount and the humanity of his staff was a secondary concern, an operational cost to be managed. He had been running a machine, not a community. He felt a hot flush of shame. He looked back at Layla, who was preparing to leave, her resignation a quiet, dignified protest against the very system he had so carefully constructed. "Please," he said, the words sounding foreign on his own tongue. "Come to my office. Don't leave yet." Carl, the manager, stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and indignation. "Mr. Thompson, sir, she was insubordinate to a major client. She quit." Thompson silenced him with a single, sharp look, a look that conveyed a seismic shift in his own authority. In the quiet of his wood-paneled office, surrounded by framed awards and glowing reviews, he gestured for Layla to sit. For a moment, he simply studied her, this woman who had single-handedly brought a titan of industry to his knees with nothing more than a few well-chosen words. "Tell me your story," he said, and it was not a command from a boss, but a genuine plea from one human being to another. And so Layla told him. She spoke not with self-pity, but with a factual, heartbreaking simplicity. She had been a professor of classical Arabic literature at the University of Damascus. Her life had been one of books, of poetry, of passionate academic debate. The war had stolen it all. It had taken her home, her university, her husband. She had fled with nothing, a refugee carrying the invisible baggage of a life that no longer existed. The waitressing job at the Gilded Spoon had been a lifeline, a way to survive, a way to send what little money she could to the scattered remnants of her family. As he listened, Mr. Thompson's world reconfigured itself. The story transformed Layla from an employee into a survivor of immense fortitude. He felt a deep, humbling admiration for her resilience, and a burning shame for his own blissful ignorance. An idea, wild and unconventional, began to spark in his mind. It was a terrifying risk, a complete departure from every business principle he had ever followed, but it also felt like the only right thing to do. He looked at Layla, at the scholar and the survivor sitting across from him in a waitress's uniform, and he saw not a problem to be solved, but a solution he never knew he needed. "I have been completely and utterly blind," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This restaurant, all these awards, they mean nothing. It has no soul. It's just an expensive machine. I want to change that. I need to change that." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "And I need your help. I want to offer you a new position. Not as a waitress, but as head of staff training and customer relations. I want you to teach us. Teach us what you know about dignity, about respect. I want you to help me build a place that is worthy of the people who work here." He was offering her a seat at the table, a chance to rebuild not just her own life, but the very culture of the world that had, only an hour before, so carelessly dismissed her. The next morning, Mr. Thompson gathered his senior management team. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. He announced Layla's promotion with a conviction that left no room for debate. But there was debate. Carl, the floor manager, was apoplectic. His face, already pale, turned a mottled shade of red. "Arthur, you can't be serious," he sputtered, forgetting all professional decorum. "A waitress? In a senior management role? It's preposterous. She has no experience in hospitality management, no business degree. Our high-profile clients, the very people who keep us in business, they will never respect her. It will make us a laughingstock." Carl was the voice of the status quo, the guardian of a cynical and prejudiced system. He represented every gatekeeper who had ever judged a person by their job title instead of their character. He saw Layla's promotion not as an opportunity, but as a threat to the established order, an insult to his own perceived expertise. He argued passionately that the restaurant's elite reputation was a delicate ecosystem that depended on fawning over the wealthy, not on what he called sentimental, feel-good initiatives. But Mr. Thompson was a changed man. The previous night's events had recalibrated his moral compass. He looked at Carl, at his sputtering rage, and saw the very blindness he himself had just overcome. "Our reputation from this day forward," Thompson declared, his voice ringing with newfound authority, "will be built on the quality of our character, not just the price of our wine. Layla has more character, more integrity, and more wisdom in her little finger than any of us have shown in years. She understands humanity. And that, it turns out, is the business we should have been in all along. The decision is final. He had made his stand. He was no longer just a proprietor. He was a leader, a catalyst for a change he was only just beginning to understand. Layla accepted the position. She did so with a quiet hesitation that quickly blossomed into a powerful sense of purpose. The transformation was immediate and striking. The worn black apron was replaced by a simple, elegant business suit. The way she walked through the dining room changed. She was no longer a fleeting shadow but a confident presence, her eyes meeting those of the staff and patrons with a calm, assured gaze. She was no longer invisible. Her training sessions were revolutionary. There were no corporate buzzwords, no trust falls, no soulless PowerPoint presentations. Instead, she gathered the staff in a circle and simply talked to them. She spoke of empathy, not as a customer service technique, but as a fundamental human connection. She used parables from ancient literature and stories from her own life to illustrate the power of seeing the person behind the order, the humanity behind the credit card. She taught them de-escalation techniques rooted in mutual respect, showing them how to defuse a difficult situation not by capitulating, but by validating the person's feelings while upholding their own dignity. At first, the staff was wary. They had been through a dozen corporate training programs, all promising a better work environment, none delivering. Carl, still simmering with resentment, did his best to undermine her, whispering doubts in the kitchen and rolling his eyes during meetings. But Layla's sincerity was a powerful force. She didn't just lecture from a podium, she lived her philosophy. She ate her meals with the dishwashers and busboys in the cramped staff cafeteria, listening to their stories and their struggles. She advocated fiercely for them, convincing a reluctant Mr. Thompson to implement longer paid breaks, to marginally increase wages, and most importantly, to enact a zero-tolerance policy for abusive customers. The change wasn't instantaneous, but it was undeniable. A new energy began to hum through the restaurant. The forced, brittle smiles of the staff were replaced by genuine warmth. Laughter could be heard from the kitchen. The service, always technically proficient, now felt personal and heartfelt. The Gilded Spoon began to shed its cold, transactional atmosphere and started to feel like a community, a team. It was becoming a place where people felt seen, and in return, they allowed the best parts of themselves to shine. Months passed. The Gilded Spoon was thriving in a way it never had before. It was still a destination for the wealthy, but now it attracted a new clientele as well, people who had heard whispers of a restaurant with not just great food, but a great soul. One evening, a familiar figure walked through the door. It was Mr. Al-Jamil. But he was a different man from the one who had stormed out in a storm of humiliated rage. He was not flanked by an entourage. He was alone, save for a small, elderly woman leaning on his arm, her face a constellation of dignified wrinkles. He looked subdued, humbled, the arrogant fire in his eyes banked to a low ember. He approached the maitre d' and asked quietly if he might be able to speak with the owner. Mr. Thompson met them at a secluded table. Mr. Al-Jamil did not sit. He explained that the woman with him was his mother. Word of his disgraceful behavior at the restaurant had reached her, and she had been profoundly ashamed. She was a woman for whom honor and respect were the cornerstones of life, values she had tried to instill in her son. She had insisted, not requested, that he return and make a proper, sincere apology. "I need to speak to the woman," Al-Jamil said, his voice quiet. "The waitress." "Layla." Thompson nodded and went to find Layla. She appeared moments later, poised and professional in her management attire. Mr. Al-Jamil stood straighter. As Layla approached the table, he took a deep breath, and in front of his mother, Mr. Thompson, and the hushed patrons of the now attentive dining room, he began to speak in formal, respectful Arabic. He apologized. It was not a perfunctory, face-saving gesture. It was a deep, heartfelt admission of his own arrogance, his own ignorance, his own profound failure as a man. He told her she had taught him a lesson that his billions of dollars never could. He asked, humbly, for her forgiveness. Layla listened, her expression calm and gracious. When he was finished, she replied in the same beautiful, classical Arabic. "Forgiveness is not something we give to others," she said softly, her words carrying across the silent room. "It is a gift we give to ourselves, so that we may be free. May you find your peace, and may you always remember that a person's worth is measured by the content of their heart, not the contents of their wallet." As she finished speaking, a remarkable thing happened. A single patron began to clap, then another and another, until the entire restaurant was filled with a wave of quiet, respectful applause. It wasn't for the drama, it was for the display of profound humanity. In a corner, Carl the manager watched, his cynical worldview shattered into a million pieces. The Gilded Spoon became a legend. It was a story people told, not just about the exquisite food or the impeccable service, but about the feeling they had when they were there, a feeling of warmth, of respect, of genuine human connection. Mr. Thompson discovered a joy in his work he had never known, a purpose that went far beyond profit and loss statements. He and Layla were no longer just employer and employee. They were partners, building something truly meaningful together. Layla, for her part, had found her voice again. She was no longer a refugee defined by what she had lost, but a leader defined by what she was building. Using her newfound platform and resources, she started a small foundation dedicated to helping other displaced professionals, scholars, doctors, and artists find work that honored their skills and their pasts. She was turning her personal triumph into a pathway for others. So, we look at people every day: the person serving our coffee, the person cleaning our office, the person driving our bus. We see the uniform, but do we truly see the person inside it? Do we see the epic stories they carry within them, the silent battles they have fought and won, the incredible wisdom they hold in their hearts? The story of Layla and Mr. Al-Jamil is not just a story. It is a reminder. It is a reminder that dignity is not a privilege of the rich, but the birthright of every human being. It is a reminder that respect is the most valuable currency we will ever possess. And it is a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful, most important voice in the entire room comes from the very person that everyone else has been taught to ignore. Share this story if you believe that every single person deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected. And the next time you interact with someone, take an extra second. Look them in the eye. Smile. Remind them that you see them, not just for the job they are doing, but for the incredible human being they are.